Hello and welcome to the Western Nebraska Virtual Property Tax Town Hall. I'm Jim Vogel, Chief Executive Officer of the Platt Institute, and I'll be your host this evening. I'm joined by Laura Ebke and Adam Weinberg. Our team at the Platt Institute focuses on removing barriers to growth and opportunity in Nebraska. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that works with Nebraskans from all different points of view to advance policies that help Nebraskans keep more of what they earn, make it easier to start and grow a business, and to build a talented workforce in the state. The local property tax burden in Nebraska imposes a barrier in each of those areas. But in recent years, the Nebraska legislature has struggled to build a consensus that would help rein in taxes on our homes, farms, and businesses. That's where today's town hall comes in. The ball may be in your court as a voter and taxpayer to build support for property tax reform through a future ballot initiative for property tax reform. That means Nebraskans who would have to work together to decide what approach would improve the tax system and generate widespread support. Throughout tonight's town hall, the floor is yours. This is an interactive event where you can discuss how property taxes impact you and to share your thoughts on ways to make things better. You can submit ideas, questions, and personal stories through the chat window or the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen here on Zoom. I also want to thank everyone who submitted their survey responses in advance. You'll be the first on the list tonight. If you'd like a moment to speak on camera or over audio to share your thoughts, please just include that request with your Q&A submission and a member of our team will get in touch with you by chat. Then I'll call on you when it's time for you to join our discussion. We'll also be running live polls tonight on property tax issues throughout tonight's town hall. Let me show you how it will work by kicking off tonight's first poll question. When we start a new poll, a question will appear on your screen. Just select your answer, click submit to have your vote counted in the poll. So for tonight's first question, let's get a sense of how the COVID-19 crisis has impacted your priorities. With everything that has happened during the COVID-19 pandemic in Nebraska, are you more concerned about property taxes, less concerned, or about as concerned as before? Now you can make your selection on the screen. More concerned, less concerned, or about as concerned as before. And while we wait for everyone to cast their vote, Adam, can you tell us a bit about what's going on with the property tax issue in Lincoln in the coming weeks?
Well, thanks, Jim. Sure, I will. And good evening, everyone. Tonight, we're discussing what voters might want to see accomplished on property taxes in Nebraska, of course. And the unicameral is expected to return to session later this month and debate their own legislative proposals sometime between July and August. Now, this is an unusual summer session in the Nebraska legislature. Typically, the unicameral completes its even year sessions by early spring. But the legislature, of course, was suspended in March due to the pandemic. Now they're planning to return on July 20th. And if you'd like to catch up with what state senators are planning to be up to about property tax reform and other legislative issues, we have a growing library of podcasts that you can check out at plattinstitute.org, our new website that was just updated with some great content. We hope you enjoy it. And you can also use the site now through our Take Action tool to find your state senator, get in contact with them, and keep in track of legislative bills as they move through the coming sessions. Now, if you'd like to stay informed as this session develops, I encourage you, we'll have more free webinar programs at plattinstitute.org/events that you can sign up for. And they're also available on the site, just like this program will be, in recorded form once the program is complete. So Jim, back to you with the results of our first poll.
Thanks, Adam. The voting is now closed on tonight's first live poll, and here are the results. Question was, with everything that has happened during the COVID-19 pandemic in Nebraska, are you more concerned about property taxes, less concerned, or about as concerned before? 40% of you said today that you're more concerned about property taxes given the COVID-19 pandemic, 7% less concerned, and 47% just as concerned as before. Now, joining with me, as I said before, is Laura Ebke. She's our senior fellow at the Platt Institute. She's also a former state senator. Laura, you're also a former school board member and no stranger to the property tax issue. Any thoughts as we look at these first poll numbers?
Well, Jim, I don't think that there should be any big surprise here. The property tax issue has been a big one for the last 10 or 12 years. When I was still on the school board in Crete, we were talking about it a lot. And certainly during my 4 years in the legislature, it was a big deal. I think that if you look at the numbers of people who are more concerned about it, I think that's an interesting piece. It probably indicates that people are more concerned as a result of COVID about the economic impact of the shutdowns and things like that.
Thanks, Laura. Appreciate that. Now that we've given our online poll a try, let's bring in our first speaker of the evening.
Well, Jim, I think I'm going to have to preempt that. Our first speaker of the evening so far has not showed up, but I can give you a little bit of a highlight about what John from Alliance was going to share with us.
Right.
This is an opportunity. It opens up some room on the schedule for more people who'd like to speak tonight. But John was talking to me previously. He was very kind to fill out our survey in advance, and he talked about how when he opens up his property tax bill, he sees a wide variety of different political subdivisions on there. It's not just his county, it's not just his school district. And so one of his thoughts was, what if we did something about what he called add-on taxes? Because in his perception, the property tax bill should really, in his view, be the county or the school district. Well, what about all these other subdivisions that collect property taxes? Should we do something to reduce those? So that more or less summarizes some of John's comments, that he felt that there could be more of a reduction of the number of tax collectors that are presented on that bill.
Thanks, Adam. Laura, do you have any thoughts or analysis on John's concern and Adam's commentary?
Well, it's certainly a concern, and something we've talked about a lot at the Platt Institute in the last 6 or 8 months. I pulled out my own tax bill today just to take a look at it, and there are over in Crete. I live in the city of Crete. There are 10 different taxing entities here, and certainly we need to think about how things like the Ag Society and the NRDs and the historical societies find their operating funds. So I think that's an important concern.
It is, and with valuations increasing as much as they have over the last decade, every single one of these political subdivisions generally experiences a windfall. In most cases, they don't refund that windfall back to the taxpayers with lower rates. So that's a great question and concern from John from Alliance. So let's do another poll. We're going to put that up on the screen right now. Would you support reducing the number of political subdivisions that rely on property tax and instead fund these local entities with sales tax revenue? Let us know if you support, oppose, or if you're undecided. And while we're waiting for everyone to vote, Laura, can you tell us some of the reasons that most local entities currently rely heavily on property tax compared to other type of taxes?
Well, certainly most of the local entities, schools, for instance, can't levy, can't impose sales taxes. Sales taxes are tough to implement, and in our state constitution and our state law allows cities to do that with, under certain circumstances. So there are limited tax revenues available for the local entities. Same as NRDs. I think how they're supposed to be a free, relatively free for folks to use, and they've got a specific purpose in terms of water management and so forth. However, they also have a lot of the recreational facilities, and maybe there's a way to recoup some of that money for that as well. But certainly Nebraska has a long history of using property taxes to pay for a lot of these different local entities.
Thanks, Laura. And now the results are in for that second poll. Here's what people are thinking about replacing property tax funding for local subdivisions with the sales tax. 63% of our participants support replacing property tax with more sales tax revenue, 15% oppose, and 22% are currently undecided. So we appreciate John's comments and concerns about getting this debate going. On a similar note, Susie, who appears to be one of John's neighbors in Alliance, also has some thoughts about local governments relying on property tax. Susie, welcome to the Platt Institute Virtual Town Hall.
Thank you very much. One of the things that I am concerned with, I've had like 40 years experience in county government, and over those 40 years, I've seen the tax shift from one taxing classification, let's say like ag land or residential or commercial. It seems like one goes up, one goes down, and it's really hard to explain to taxpayers what this shift is all about. And because so much of our reliance here is on the local to pay for local taxes. It would be nice if we could somehow stabilize that tax base. And that would be one of my questions. Is that something that the legislature will be considering, is a stabilization of our taxing base?
Yeah, the difficulty, and I'll hand this off to Adam and to Laura. The state, not since the 60s, isn't a property taxing entity. And so everybody looks to the Nebraska legislature for a solution. Certainly there's LB 1106 in this session, which is related to education funding and has some valuation components to it. But to your point, there hasn't been that stabilization that taxpayers, I think, generally want to see. Adam or Laura, do you have any further thoughts?
Well, the only thing, again, as you point out, Jim, the issue of the constitutional reliance on where we gave back, the state gave back the power of property taxes to the local entities, sort of the grand bargain of the 60s, is an important element to this. And so tax relief from the state really has to come in the form of either taking on the spending in some way, and the funding of some big chunk of local government, or else sending money back from the general revenue.
Thanks, Laura. Adam, do you have anything to offer before we move on to our next property tax town hall participant?
Well, I think I'm going to save some room because we're probably going to open a can of worms here with what Melissa's going to talk about here in a moment. They're going to be talking about, she's going to be talking about the consumption tax issue. And so what I'm going to do is find Melissa on our attendee list and invite her on now. And I'm going to bring Melissa into the conversation. We just need to unmute her audio there. Melissa, can you hear us? And Melissa, it's your option whether you'd like to be on screen or whether you'd like to do audio. Melissa, we'll just need you to unmute your audio and you'll be all set to go.
Okay, great. Okay, so do you want me to talk about LR 300CA or the consumption tax, or do you want me to talk about my concerns about valuation and local property taxes?
Well, it sounds to me like those are related concerns. So I think they're probably concerns a lot of people share. So feel free to expand on your thoughts.
Okay, great. When you hear of your local Board of Equalization say, I understand you're frustrated about your valuations going up, but there's nothing we can do. Our hands are tied. But yet you see so many inequalities in the analytical spreadsheets, like comparing the sales of less than 20-acre properties with homes and using those sales to raise the values of homes, barns, shops, and sheds attached to large acreages on farms and ranches by 20%. If a person were interested in buying an acreage of less than 20 acres with a home, I don't think the realtor would show him a farm or ranch of several thousand acres with a home on it. These two properties are not comparable in physical, functional, or location characteristics. And therefore, that is one of the reasons why the property tax system is unfair. And it is also, I think, the statutes for property tax valuation should be transparent, easily understood by the common Joe, and appeared fairly. The system and process to protest is complicated and intimidating. When you hear that assessors are taught in trainings that they should raise valuations for those taxpayers who do not allow access to their homes until they buckle and say, enough is enough, come on in. And when a state appraiser tells you that he will raise your valuations if you protest, and if you reply, what if I don't protest? And he answers, then I'll raise your valuations until you do. And you reply, then I'm damned if I do and damned if I don't. And he just smiles back at you. But yet, in the information put out by the County Board of Commissioners in the opening paragraph, it states, it is the County Commissioner's duty as a Board of Equalization to act as an impartial third party. Regarding the system, in order for it to be less intimidating, there should be uniform language for starters. Does improvements mean buildings, or does it mean you made upgrades such as a new roof? Even on our County West Assessor's website, it advises that taxpayers should report all improvements. Do they mean new buildings or upgrades? So even they use the term interchangeably. What does site improvements mean? Is that different from improvements? Does it mean you have running water and electricity, or does it mean you have a machine shop and other outbuildings? Should
Hey,
your
Melissa?
valuation?
Melissa,
Yes.
we're going to ask you to kind of summarize your argument there, because we have a lot of other participants here today. If you want to get to the consumption tax, you might want to address that too right now.
Okay. Well, I had a really important point. Our assessor
Go ahead
is
and make it. Go ahead and make
assessing.
it.
Our assessor is assessing our septic tanks, which have been grandfathered in for 70 years. We're just now receiving $20,000 per home assessment on that. Okay, so if you want, I can wait later in the program to talk about the consumption tax.
Oh, no, we can talk about it right now. Do you want to give people a sense of why you think it would be important to adopt that instead of relying on valuations?
Okay. If LR 300CA, or whatever its descendant is called, if it were passed, we understand no business inputs would be taxed. We understand this applies to all businesses, whether it be a lawyer, Walmart, tire store, or a farmer. We would not pay taxes on our inputs, such as tractor parts, baler twines, tire for pickups, etc. However, we would have, us personally, we only pay $25,000 a year in tax, but that's a lot more than a lot of other people, a lot less than a lot of large farmers or ranchers. But we would have $25,000 each year to buy consumer goods that would be taxed and would contribute to our local economy through the local premium or multiplier effect. We understand that LR 300CA is, or its new version, would end state income tax, state inheritance tax, state property taxes, and sales taxes on business purchases. The most exciting part of this bill is that it ends state property taxes because the property valuation system is flawed, and it's time to replace it with a new revenue producing system that is fair to all and easy to implement, such as the consumption tax.
Well, I think that was a good summary of it, Melissa. So thank you so much. And Laura, do you have any additional thoughts, since you had a chance to watch the legislature, about what is going on with, and maybe any background points about the consumption tax concept?
Well, sure. The concept has been around for a while. It's something that's, you can look it up as a fair tax, is basically the consumption tax. It raises, it's appealing on the surface, and it's certainly something that we ought to take a look at. Whether or not we can get there, there aren't very many places that have, it's a movement that's been around for probably 10 years. At least, and it hasn't really generated any real enthusiasm, in large part because, you don't know where, what happens if, you make that switch, and then what happens if the revenue doesn't come in that you're expecting. So people get kind of nervous about that.
Adam, any further thoughts on consumption tax before we
Yeah,
wrap up?
I mean, as Laura said, I think it's an idea that actually has a popularity and a movement. We use the term consumption tax, but really what it is a broad-based sales tax. It's a sales tax that only applies, kind of like the national fair tax does, to new consumer goods and services. So you're talking about a sales tax that basically would be on everything you would purchase, except for things that are not except for things that are used items, except for business inputs. And the concept that the consumption tax proponents have is that they'd like to use this tax to replace a whole slew of other taxes in Nebraska. Of course, the property taxes we're discussing tonight, but also the personal income tax, the corporate income tax, the inheritance tax. So there's a lot of enthusiasm about that concept because it's very different than what we have. So that's the positive. The negative from opponents would be it's very different from what we have. And so there's a lot to work through on that. But it's certainly an interesting discussion we saw in legislative hearings for LR 300CA. There were a lot of folks out for it. And so I think that's one of the questions in our poll tonight is, have people given a thought to whether they would be interested in paying sales tax on almost everything they purchase at a consumer level, and in exchange, changing this tax structure in this way? And I think, Jim, that's kind of where we're going next.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't know how high that consumption tax or that sales tax rate would be, but we're going to ask you about it right now. Our poll question number 3, how would you vote on a constitutional amendment to end local property and state income taxes, replacing them instead with a 10.5% sales tax on all new consumer goods and services you purchase? Do you support, oppose, or undecided? While we're waiting for those votes to come in, let me tell you a little bit more about how ballot initiative ideas like the consumption tax proposal work in Nebraska. As I mentioned before, the legislature looked at this idea earlier in the year because there are two ways initiatives can get on the ballot in Nebraska. The first is that a state senator can introduce a resolution for ballot measure, which is what happened with the consumption tax. But in order for an issue to get in front of the voters that way, the legislature would have to approve giving Nebraskans the chance to vote on either the law or the constitutional amendment. That's likely not going to happen with property tax reform because the legislature has struggled to even pass its own legislation. So the second way an issue gets on the ballot is through a petition drive. That is authorized by the Nebraska Secretary of State. Laura, as a former legislator, do you want to offer any insight on petition drives you've seen in recent years? We certainly have had a few, and we've got a couple that look like they're going to hit the ballot this year.
Right. Yeah, we certainly have had a number of petition drives. That seems to be the way that things get done when they get locked up in the legislature these days. With the 33 vote requirement to get past the filibuster, some organizations, some people have just decided to take it directly to the citizenry. We'll have we had the Medicaid expansion one a few years ago. We have the medical marijuana one that I'll probably be on this year, and there's another one I'm trying to think, gambling, which will be on the ballot again this year. So I think it's important to keep that option open for the second house, but it does seem to be one of the dangers of that also is that it doesn't go through the same kind of hearing process and analysis, and so then if it gets enacted, then the policymakers have to figure out how to make it work.
Thanks, Laura. And now we have the results on Melissa's proposal for a consumption tax in Nebraska. And here's what Western Nebraskans have to say so far. Surprisingly, 66% say they would support it, pretty high number, 28% oppose, and 6% are undecided. So thank you all for taking that poll. So we've received a preview of what some voters and taxpayers in this part of the state think of one potential ballot initiative idea. We're going to be hosting town halls like this one in 4 other regions in the state, and it will be interesting to continue asking voters and taxpayers what they think in those regions. Adam, can you tell us a bit about why we're not voting on a property tax ballot initiative this year?
Sure. Jim, well, as folks know, there were grassroots campaigns to place property tax related initiatives on the ballot in Nebraska, actually in the last 2 calendar years, but neither campaign ended up qualifying for the ballot. Now, the process for qualifying for the ballot is not easy. It's not cheap. Campaign sponsors have to file with the Secretary of State, and then they have petition gatherers who are authorized to go out and collect signatures for their legislation. But those petition circulators have to personally collect each signature from each individual and follow state laws about how to do that. So to put that proposed ballot initiative on the ballot, you need the signatures of 7% of registered voters if you're talking about legislation. If you want to propose a constitutional amendment, which is what we just voted on a minute ago, you need signatures from 10% of the voters who are registered in that period of time. And to add yet another challenge, in Nebraska, you need your signatures to be from at least 5% of the registered voters in 38 counties, which is added as a safeguard to make sure that you don't get all your signatures in just 1 or 2 cities, you have a representative sampling of the population supporting your initiative. So when you have a threshold like that, when you have rules like that in place to qualify for the ballot, a certain amount of your signatures are not going to be valid no matter what you do, because some people won't end up registering to vote. Some people will sign the petition in the wrong county. Some people might give you a fake signature because they're trying to waste your time. So that means you really need more signatures than the law requires, and to have those turned in at least 4 months before the general election begins. And so a campaign that's just a volunteer campaign to get on the ballot is really at a major disadvantage. And that's why the campaigns that appear likely to qualify this year really are paid petition gathering efforts that collected well more than the legally required number of signatures. And these are all factors that Nebraskans interested in property tax reform are going to have to study carefully if they do have the desire to get their own measure on the ballot. So Jim, that's all about where we are right now on the ballot front. And of course, in the years ahead, I think we'll have a lot of discussions, especially based on this most recent vote, on whether that's something people want to entertain going forward.
I think you're right, Adam. Thank you. And on the point of passing ballot initiative efforts, we now have Whitey from Ogallala on the town hall. Whitey, you were a petition circulator on the most recent property tax campaign, and you said you encountered some problems. Why don't you share some of those with us right now?
Okay, really the first problem I had when I first heard about the proposal for the 35% rebate, I wanted to sign the petition, but I couldn't find any place to sign. So I sent an email to two Nebraskans, and well, after a couple of weeks, Senator Erdman appeared on my doorstep with a form for me to sign and a couple of blank forms that he asked me to circulate. So I went ahead and went to some neighbors, got a few signatures there, and then I don't know, kind of got to the point there's nobody else to ask, and so it kind of lay dormant. And then about 3 months later, we had a Christmas open house, and we had about 100 visitors come through. And out of those 100 visitors, I probably got about 30 signatures. So, you know, it dawned on me that the people have to come to you. The circulator can't go out to the people. It's just too time consuming. And so anyhow, the thing that I thought that we needed to do was to first of all kind of go by areas on these petition things and get all the information out to the people in a particular area. And along with this information, give a kind of a schedule or something about locations and times that volunteers will be available with petition forms that the people can come in to sign. And kind of like the Red Cross does with their blood drives. You know, they announce they're going to have a drive, and they tell you when and where and the times, and that way people that wanted to sign would be able to. And I think that's my main point, that you know, we've got to make it easier for the people to sign the petitions, and it has to be timely, so that we're asking them to sign right after we're telling them what the petition is about, and not waiting a long time. Because out of the 100 people that came at Christmas time, I was amazed at the number that really weren't familiar with the petition that was out there.
Thanks, Whitey. Really appreciate your thoughts. Now that we've heard from some folks interested in supporting a ballot initiative, let's also hear the other side of the story. That's what town halls are all about, right? Ballot initiatives do have positives and negatives. So joining us now is Bill from Scotts Bluff. And Bill would like to speak on why he believes a ballot initiative is the wrong approach for property tax reform. Bill, welcome to the Platt Institute Town Hall.
And Bill, we're just trying to get you unmuted here, but so I'll try to make sure that we can hear your sound. Bill, I think we just need you to hit that mute button one time.
I think I'm on. Thanks,
There we go.
Adam.
We can hear you now.
Nice to visit with you last week. So, you know, my concerns are with what's euphemistically called ballot box democracy. You know, these ballot ideas get put together without, as was mentioned earlier, you know, discussion, debate, study. You know, these issues are really complex, and I'm really looking for the leadership of the state to take this issue on. They haven't yet, but I'd hate to see Nebraska come on with a solution like Tabor in Colorado or Prop 13 in California, and end up with some bad legislation that really hamstrings the state and prevents us from moving forward and modernizing the state. You know, we've really had some impressive companies move to Nebraska, some high-tech companies. I think it's important that we remain flexible and you know, really study the issues and get the information out. And I think these town halls are a wonderful concept. What I'd like to see is the folks participating in this Western Nebraska town hall is get our area senators together with us, Erdman and Stinner, and Brewer, and try to figure out what do we need to do. Get our senators with ourselves, people who are active and interested in participating in this town hall. I'd like to see the same thing happen with town halls all across the state. But it's to take on this property tax issue, it's going to take leadership, and we need to get the governor, the chairman of the Revenue Committee, the Appropriations Committee, the Speaker of the legislature together, and they need to hammer out something that they can take to the whole legislature and get moving on this. It's going to take some structural changes to our tax code. We're not going to be able to wait for new money. It's not going to happen. We're not going to have a windfall. We're not going to have 5 incredible new industries move to town and provide us a windfall. But the problem that we have right now is been created by people who control state government and have prevented solutions from coming forward. So, we hear things like, it's not fair to raise one man's taxes to lower another man's taxes. Well, that's not the problem. What we need is a tax system that's fair and is a modern form of taxation for the state. I did listen to Senator Linehan's webinar on your site before coming on this evening. It sounds like they're working on something pretty strong in the way of LB 1106, and I think that has some potential. But I think that's going to pretty well wrap up what I had to say, and appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it. And to your point, one of the downsides of these ballot initiatives is that they're very complicated, and it's asking a lot of voters to read a ballot question and fully understand the impact that these structural changes may make. So thank you so much for pointing that out, Bill. Now that we've talked a bit about the structure of tax policies and whether a ballot initiative is a good approach, we now have by audio Frankie from Dalton, and Frankie would like to speak about spending. Frankie, welcome to the virtual town hall.
Hi. Okay, so my question is, so if property taxes mainly fund schools, how are schools held accountable with the money they receive? Do schools receive the money based on their performance and scores? And also, what about parents? They have school choice to where the money follows the student. So the parent chooses where the student goes, whether it's public, private, charter, or homeschool. And the whole thing is higher. I am not for higher taxes or new taxes. I am for cutting expenses. So how is the money, more money does not produce better education. It's how it's being spent. So are the schools audited and held accountable for any of that money that they receive?
I'm not, thank you so much, Frankie, for that question. The state provides funding to school districts through the TIOSA formula. I am not aware of any accountability measures that is associated with that funding. It's a formula that is mandated by legislation, and the formula is calculated. Adam and Laura, do you have any thoughts on Frankie's question?
Sure. Well, there's many of the schools out in Western Nebraska aren't getting money out of the TIOSA formula, for one thing. So they are depending almost exclusively on property taxes, but there is no accountability built in aside from the fact that you elect, you're collecting local taxes, and the people who are running the local school board are elected by you. And so they're responsible, your local school board members are responsible to you for the spending that's going on in the schools. Both Bill and Frankie, though, have raised really important points that I think we ought to just kind of toss out there. Bill pointed out that there's not going to be a big revenue windfall, that there's no revenue that's just waiting for us to swoop it up. So any major property tax reform is going to mean new taxes or something someplace else, unless we can get to the question that Frankie has of spending, unless you can figure out how to significantly decrease the spending. But it's not just at the local level, it's going to be also at the state level that we've got to look at that to make it all balance out.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. And one of the challenges of LB 1106, which is sponsored by Revenue Chair Senator Linehan, and that's the property tax bill that is going to be debated when the legislature resumes next Monday, is that it has significant opposition from the education lobby. And one of the reasons why is that there is a 2% spending cap associated with the foundation aid or the funding that is attributed to LB 1106. Adam, anything before we wrap it up and move to the next poll question?
Yeah, I think and Frankie had a lot of great thoughts that she did not have an opportunity to share, and maybe she held back maybe more than she ought to, because it seems like we are having a fairly freewheeling discussion here this evening. But, you know, she was bringing up the overall point in our previous discussions about spending. And that is, of course, one of the things that oftentimes when we get into this longer discussion about the tax structure, a lot of times we're talking about revenue neutral tax reform, where we're talking about how do we change exemptions in the tax code, or in some proposals, how do we change tax rates to account for changes in property taxes. And a lot of people get frustrated with that and say, well, why are you not talking more about spending? Because ultimately, taxes are the price of government spending. If you don't want to pay taxes, then you have to make decisions about what priorities a government should set. And I know we're going to ask a poll question about that in a minute, but you know, one of the difficulties of that is it's very easy to say, well, you should just cut spending. But the truth of the matter is we all benefit from government services that are the source of public spending and government's taxpayer funded spending in some way or another. And oftentimes you can see across the state, it sounds really great to cut spending, but then sometimes it's hard to set those priorities because every community thinks they need new facilities because they think that that is really important for their quality of life. Sometimes the communities may want facilities that don't necessarily fit the scale of that community. A lot of communities are having financial difficulties. I wrote one article on our website, plattinstitute.org, because a lot of communities have built publicly funded golf courses. A lot of places want public swimming pools, and these are great things, but they cost money. And so ultimately that means they're going to rely on some type of tax to fund. A lot of times they rely on property taxes. If they don't rely on property taxes, they rely on sales taxes. And some people may say, okay, it's a sales tax, so nobody has to buy something they don't want to. But if you're going to pay property taxes to fill up a swimming pool or to maintain a golf course, you can't use that money from a sales tax to reduce your property taxes. So all of these questions are difficult to answer when it comes to spending, because if you really want to take a huge chunk out of property taxes in Nebraska, you either have to cut a lot of spending, or you have to have a combination of changes to your tax structure along with controls or restraints on spending. And so it's not a perfect answer that people want, right? Because you can't just say, well, I want lower taxes and not to change any government services, or I want to be able to have my cake and eat it too on any other combination of ways you do it. So this is one of the reasons why we want to have this conversation with Nebraskans and be able to really figure out what are the right combination of changes that will enable broad-based and sustainable property tax reform.
Adam is absolutely right. And I think they're putting my old school board member hat on. I think I would challenge everybody to call their local superintendent and say, what percentage of your annual operating budget is cooked into the, as a given? And that would probably be your salaries, and the cost of salaries is typically, in the neighborhood of 65 to 70% of your total budget. And those have some automatic increases because of the nature of our negotiated agreements and things like that. So it's hard to cut that portion of your budget to begin with. So, we need to find these things out before we jump too far ahead.
Thanks, Laura. And thank you, Frankie. That was a great comment and great thoughts that you had. So let's poll a hard question that we've asked voters in other parts of Nebraska before, but not specifically Western Nebraska. And Adam, why don't you go ahead and put that poll question up? In order to reduce local property taxes, would you be willing to reduce government spending, even if it resulted in cuts in services, including public education, local health programs, or road maintenance? Do you support, oppose, or are you undecided? Laura, it seems once you get down to it, this is often the question. So much of the property tax issue revolves around you, and Adam and I have just talked about that spending equates to property taxes. You don't have property taxes without spending. Any further thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, this is a challenge for policymakers and for citizens, because when push comes to shove, we all like our roads to be good. We all like our great public schools. We all think that our teachers ought to be paid, fairly, and yet we don't want to spend the money to do that. The money's got to come from someplace.
Absolutely. Thanks, Laura. We're going to read the poll results right now. All right. 55% of the participants this evening say they would support reducing spending in favor of local or reduced property taxes. 31% would oppose, and 14% are undecided. Hot topic.
So this is a particularly dedicated audience that really probably feels a high degree of passion about reducing their property taxes, that they feel that they've had to make sacrifices. And so they're looking at other folks to make sacrifices too, especially in a difficult time. And we understand that, of course, but we're going to do this program in 4 other locations around Nebraska, talking with different voters. And what we've seen from previous polling is, especially as you get closer to more urbanized areas of the state, this margin shrinks, or the margin is often flipped. And I think there's some sense to that. And Laura can speak to this as a former legislator. There's definitely a different perception about what some of these political subdivisions bring to the table for the tax dollars that people are paying when you live in some of the communities where it's maybe more directly observed from day to day. When you got the street lights and the sidewalk and the swimming pool right in your community, it does make a difference.
Well, that's absolutely true. Maintaining the gravel roads, making sure that the schools are good. I mean, there's all sorts of things. I think we need to look at cutting spending, absolutely. And that would be my focus. But we need to, we also need to challenge ourselves to say, okay, what would we cut? Because your policymakers believe that the things that they're spending money on are the things that you want.
Adam, did you coerce Frankie to come back on and talk some more?
I didn't, but let's see here. No, I think we have some more thoughts from Melissa. She came up with she said, Western Nebraska schools don't receive school aid from TIOSA because of state property tax administration, and it makes sure the Western Nebraska counties property valuations go up so they don't qualify for TIOSA aid. Laura, any thoughts there?
Well, it's true that the folks out in Western Nebraska, most rural districts don't receive much, and that is because of the property tax valuations and in the rural areas and the farm ground especially. There's all sorts of reasons for that, whether or not it's deliberate or whether or not it's because you have people that have spent a lot of money, different housing areas. My valuations go up based on what the most recent sales are, and you have the same issue with land. The problem is that land doesn't move as fast, and so you can have one person in the township or whatever that will purchase a new piece of land, and that raises everybody else's valuations, even if it's something that you're going to hold on to and it's been in the family for the last 100 years.
Well, Jim, I have a question actually that came in that I think is right up your alley. People may not know this because you're an Omaha guy, but you were once, I believe it's split up by different sections of the state. And so you once sat on the Board of Education Lands and Funds.
I did.
And so you had quite a while learning about how some of those dollars are used in the education funding system. And so Joyce from McPherson County says, I feel that overly high property taxes on farmers and ranchers is akin to buying our jobs every year before we can begin to pay expenses and pay ourselves. She goes on to say, it seems to me that people in other professions don't have that same effect where they're essentially paying to work. She also said that she believes the rent paid on school sections should stay in the county where it is located, especially since Eastern Nebraska sold all of theirs many years ago. The counties only get back, and these are her words, the amount that is equivalent to taxes if it was privately owned. And I'm sure she would like to know, as a former board member on BELF, do you have any thoughts about how that system works? Is it fair? Should it be changed?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, BELF is a creature that was created by the Nebraska legislature. And so they are mandated by the legislation which formed that board many, many years ago. Many people don't know that hundreds of years ago, the federal government actually owned this school land and they gifted it to the states. And the Nebraska legislature quite some time ago decided that the Board of Education Lands and Funds would manage this school land, and the proceeds from lease revenue would go towards education funding. And that education funding goes into one pool and is distributed to schools based on a certain formula. I think her question is certainly legitimate. I think one of the downsides of doing what she said from a county standpoint is because there's so much land mass in Western Nebraska that it would probably disproportionately give more counties and their school districts more money, but it's certainly worth the conversation. It's also worth the conversation. We've had senators look at this and discuss it off the record, session after session, of whether or not the state actually needs to sell that land and use those proceeds instead to fund direct property tax relief and use that as a vehicle for property tax reform. So it's a great question. And not many people know about the Board of Education Lands and Funds. I had the opportunity to serve for almost 5 years, and there's a significant amount of money that is generated from those school land. If my memory, if my memory serves me correct, I mean, we're talking $32 million on an annual basis.
Well, thanks, Jim. And I'm seeing if Casey Shoemaker wants to come on the program, because I know he's very opinionated about all manner of property taxes, and I'm just looking at some of his thoughts, and we appreciate him and many others who are being engaged. He also says that many folks don't understand the salary arrays and how government agencies are forced into raising wages constantly. Hope you don't mind me quoting you there, but I do appreciate you watching and hope to get your feedback about this program when we're done. You know, one thing that people are on the comment section and in emails that we received in advance, I think it fits into the larger discussion about why people might be enthusiastic about a concept like a consumption tax is there are a lot of people who are interested in the idea of having a system that they get some more control over when to pay their tax, mainly the sales tax, right? The property tax, it's assessed, and based on what the market and the assessor decide, that can affect how much tax you pay, even if you didn't really change anything about your property. The income tax, you go and you pay a tax rate based on what you earn, and you pay that way, and it comes, for a lot of us, it comes out of our paycheck, and that's all there is to it. And so I think some people find it attractive to pay through sales. I think one of the questions people have is, are we looking at enough of the sales tax exemptions that we have in the state? Obviously, a consumption tax gets rid of the vast majority of them, but not all of them. Jim, do you want to kind of give people some thoughts about what's going on with sales tax exemptions in Nebraska, what the lay of the land is there, and what is some of the work we've done on it?
Sure. I think we've actually led on this issue, and when we first started talking about it, not many senators were in support of it, and I think we've seen some movement on that. Thankful to our research. And what Adam's referring to is that we are a tax system, when you look at our sales tax, that is built on various carve-outs. So this industry or this service or this good, depending on how well sometimes you lobby in the state, you get carved out and are exempt from sales tax. And I believe only 3 out of 8 services are currently taxed in Nebraska, and we're a much different service type based economy than we were in the 60s when a lot of these tax policies were adopted. If you look at neighboring states like South Dakota, who have lower property taxes and certainly no income tax, their breadth of their sales tax is much higher than Nebraska's, and that's largely because they exempt fewer services and goods in their state. If you look at states that have done some substantial tax reform, whether it's income tax or otherwise, they're doing it through broadening their base and lowering rates. And so it's an issue that we have outlined as a revenue source for Nebraska to lower property, sales, income, other types of taxes here in the state. And I think if we want to raise the fairness issue and look at how other states are modernizing their tax systems, it's by looking at ending some of these exemptions, with the exception, of course, of business inputs, which is bad tax policy.
Why is it bad tax policy? Because a lot of people, they return to that and they say, well, you want to get rid of these sales tax exemptions, but you don't get rid of sales tax exemptions on ag. And a lot of people, they think that you're trying to be duplicitous in holding that position. Is there a really compelling reason? Of course there is. Why don't you tell us what the compelling reason is?
Yeah, whether it's an ag or business input, it's what we call pyramiding. And the more you tax inputs along the way of a manufacturing cycle or an ag cycle, it's going to lead to higher consumer prices at the end. And that's just generally not good tax policy. And so when we talk about eliminating sales tax exemptions, we want to make sure that those are off the table.
Well, thanks, Jim. Laura, any thoughts that you want to expand on the sales tax conversation?
No, not really. Certainly sales tax is an appealing way to, it's out of sight, out of mind in many ways. And it seems more fair. When we lived in Tennessee 30 years ago, I guess, for a few years when my husband was in the military, they depended almost entirely on sales tax, but we were paying sales tax on just about everything. And it hurts when you go buy a new car. It hurts when you, it hurts when you, go buy Christmas presents. And you feel it when it's, when the sales tax, I think at the time was about 9% in Tennessee. But you're not paying, personal property taxes. So we licensed our new car once, we paid for it, and then we paid $25 a year to relicense it. So you didn't have to pay any extra taxes on that. So, I mean, it's an interesting concept. And if we had, if Nebraska had started out that way, it would be a lot easier to stay there. But it's a tough, we have been so dependent on property taxes, and then we added the income taxes in the 60s that it's awfully hard for us to imagine how you would go back to sort of a consumption-based, broad-based sales tax and get rid of those other taxes, because those are revenue streams now that we understand and that we have some level of predictability about.
I think another aspect that often goes undiscussed, and one of the reasons in our own organization we've been skeptical about raising the sales tax rate itself, is that if you look at history, the sales tax rate has gone up a number of times, but we haven't gotten the lasting property tax reform that Nebraskans were really expecting. I mean, the entire purpose of creating the sales and the income tax in Nebraska was to have lasting property tax reform, and that didn't work. And now they've gone over a number of different increases over the years. And so when people say, well, the answer is just to raise one of these taxes and we'll have balance to our tax structure, it's more complicated than that, much more, because you have to have the limitations upon property taxing authority paired with that. And that is one of the issues that we've tried to introduce into the property tax debate, I think, in Nebraska. And I think we're starting to make gains. But the question is, will we be able to make gains through the legislative process, or are the voters themselves going to have to take an issue like that in their own hands? Because it is very difficult to pare back on that. It's very easy to say, well, we want revenue because that is how we will get property tax reform. But then actually pairing the revenue with the reforms seems to be the real difficulty.
And that certainly raises the question of spending again. The spending issue, and maybe I jumped in there, Jim, when I shouldn't have, but you looked like you were getting ready to say something. But the spending is certainly a big part of this question of how we can reduce taxes, all the taxes. So.
Thanks, Laura. Adam, are there any other questions in the Q&A section that we want to address before?
Well, I think there's just let's see. Casey says we need budgetary authority to be adjusted. Spend it or lose it among government subdivisions is a problem. So that's his 2 cents there. And then there were 2 other questions on sales taxes that came up. And one of them was whether we impose sales tax on internet purchases. And broadly now we do, because a couple years ago there was a US Supreme Court case that enabled states to do that and collect sales tax on online transactions. And so we do that for the vast majority of transactions now. Every once in a while, something will slip through. Every once in a while, you might buy something from a small retailer out of state who doesn't have the obligation to collect sales taxes because there's a threshold at which they go. But typically now, if you buy something on Amazon, if you buy something on Walmart.com or any other online retailer, and you're buying taxable goods, which are most of the things we're buying on the internet, as well as, downloaded things, which typically are considered goods or taxable services, those will be taxed nowadays in Nebraska. So that's less of a concern as far as, but at the same time, it's not quite yet the solution to all of our revenue problems. And then another question was, wouldn't a high sales tax rate promote others to go out of state or purchase online? And that's a legitimate concern. And that's one of the questions, I think, why we've been cautious about just saying, well, we can just jack up the sales tax rate however high we want. At some point, people may decide, especially where I live in Omaha, if you tell me that groceries are going to be 10 or 11%, I may not, if I'm going to the corner for a loaf of bread, I'm probably going to pay the 10 cents or whatever that is. But if I'm going to buy hundreds of dollars of groceries, like in an emergency situation we just all recently experienced, I might think very carefully about whether I need to go to Council Bluffs to load up. So those are all questions to deal with. And then, Jim, I think we have a final poll question based on everything we've discussed today.
Yeah, and we've had a great discussion tonight, so I appreciate everybody engaging. But before we go, I want to check with those in attendance to see how our conversation has shaped your perspective about what ought to happen in Nebraska in the years ahead. So we're going to launch poll number 5, and here's our final poll question of the evening. Now that you've heard about some of the issues and potential ideas for property tax reform in Nebraska, who do you believe would do a better job adopting changes to Nebraska's property tax laws? Nebraska voters, the Nebraska legislature, or are you undecided? Go ahead and vote, and we will show the results very shortly.
And I'm seeing the poll numbers bounce up and down. It's a competitive race for the moment. It looks like
we're all on the edge of our seats, Adam.
And we'll keep it open here for the next minute or 30 seconds. We'll do it like the Nebraska legislature, where we'll ask if all have voted who care to, because everyone is welcome to vote in this. If you are on the program, all you have to do is click on your screen and click the submit button on some devices to make sure it went through. Going once, going twice. All right, we are now going to close the polling on this question, and Jim, you're welcome to go ahead and share those with everybody.
All right, so now that you've heard about some of the issues we've discussed tonight on property tax reform, who do you believe would do the best job adopting changes? The leading answer was Nebraska voters with 62%, the legislature 27%, and 12% of you are undecided. Thank you for taking that poll. I don't think that that's necessarily different from the views that we'll see across the state, but I'm looking forward to the 4 other property tax town halls that we're going to have across the state in the months ahead. I want to thank everyone for joining us and helping us to make this virtual event possible, especially with all the difficulties these last few months have brought. I'd be grateful for your feedback as the Platt Institute continues its work to remove barriers for Nebraskans. You can find the recording of this event soon and connect with me and my team anytime at plattinstitute.org, on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Have a great evening, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.